Ekans is snake backwards, Squirtle's a turtle, Mareep's a sheep, Blaziken is the kickin chicken, and Snorlax is your mother at the buffet on a regular Sunday afternoon. Many Pokemon are based off of real-life animals, but in the Pokemon anime and even in the Pokedex, we have seen normal, real-life animals. Mongoose, fish, even worms. But now they're gone. So what happened to them all? Are they really gone? Or were they never here to begin with? Hi there, I'm Kurlik, and I'm here to discuss with you what happened to the animals of the Pokemon world. We'll go over a number of different theories in detail, but I'm going to tell you right now, I believe I have definitive proof as to what happened to animals in this world. As always, this video will be split into chapters that you can follow along with on the timeline, as we will talk about a number of different topics, including the Great Pokemon Wars, Pokerus, and how humans and Pokemon have developed a relationship over time. But first and foremost, let's talk about those references to real-life animals that we see both in the games and in the anime. Since there are tons of references to real-life animals, both in the game and the anime, I decided that what I would do is, instead of going over every single one along the way, that instead I will handpick a couple of them that will fairly represent the entirety of the information that is available to us. The main reason for this is because a lot of it is incredibly similar and can be explained by just stating one of the many. One of these examples would be that a chef aboard the SS Anne mentions several meat dishes: îles à barbecue, salmon du salade, and prime beefsteak. I don't know why I said salad that way. I feel like SpongeBob when he said salad. Anywho, dishes in Pokemon are seen in both the old games and the new games, because even as we look at the Scarlet and Violet games, some of the food in there doesn't look like Pokemon at all, but you can buy it and it has to come from somewhere, which is really strange considering information we'll talk about later. In Pokemon X and Y, real-world butterflies will appear in the background during some of the battles. In addition, in the Pokedex entries for both Raichu and Ghastly, Indian elephants are explicitly mentioned. Knowing that Raichu can have enough electricity and volts to drop an Indian elephant, and Ghastly has enough poison that is around its miasma, or in its miasma rather, to actually fell an Indian elephant. But later on in Pokedex entries, the Indian elephant specifically is replaced by Caparaja. Other references do include things such as Lickitung can extend its tongue like a chameleon, which we do have Kecleon now, but not when Lickitung was first derived in Generation 1. Shellos and Gastrodon eat microscopic plankton. Once again, we don't have a replacement for plankton yet, I'm thinking. That's why I'm looking around, and I can't think of a single one that would represent plankton in the slightest. Fluttermane does say that it does have features to a ghostly pterosaur that was covered in a paranormal magazine, but the two have little else in common. Now, when we look at pterosaurs, that is actually what Aerodactyl is. Aerodactylus is the Latin term for a type of pterosaur. Early on in the Pokemon anime Challenge of the Samurai, there is a moment very early on in which Ash actually dresses up like a cow. This is actually more of a reference to Japanese kanji and the puns that exist there, because mushi means insect while ushi means cow. Now, that translation is lost when it moves into the English dub, but the pun is still kind of there, as instead of saying Caterpie, Ash says Cowterpie. Now, we can also look at the fact that Miltank didn't exist in Pokemon until Generation 2. A few episodes later, in Waters of the Cerulean City, we do see some fish in a fish tank, and in future episodes, we also do see a picture of a Slowpoke that has its tail being bitten by a very normal looking fish, not a Pokemon. Don't know why I had to say it that way, as if it would be a very abnormal fish that isn't a Pokemon. We're moving on. There's also the reference that a lot of people know about, which is the mongoose that is seen in the episode The Ghost of Maiden's Peak, that Ekans is wrapping itself around, and you see in like every single Pokemon thumbnail that exists if they're talking about normal animals and where the heck they went and all the references to them. Even this one, because that's probably exactly what I did. I don't know yet because I haven't drawn the thumbnail yet. A more specific quote that we can look at is in the episode Sparks Fly for Magnemite, where after witnessing a wild Magnemite fall in love with Pikachu, Brock comments that he can understand a romantic-based relationship between animal-based Pokemon, but not an inorganic-based Pokemon like Magnemite. This is one of those more clear-cut moments that define the idea that Pokemon aren't really animals, or at least if we just kind of base it off of what's being said in this episode. There are also, in general, a lot of references where things like Bellsprout eat insects, or there are other Pokemon that it just says they eat bugs. You can always attribute this to the idea that, oh, hey, the idea of bug Pokemon can just get reduced down to just saying bugs because there's no other type of bug, right? Well, that still gets challenged in the anime itself, not just in the Pokedex. But as we continue to move along, there's the episode of Clefairy Tales where when everyone falls down, they actually see several skeletons of unidentified prehistoric animals, and they also talk about cooking chicken later on. Now, these prehistoric animals could all be just simply references to future fossil Pokemon that are going to get revived, leaving room open for the creators, writers, designers, and artists of Pokemon to actually create something new, having it set up early on, potentially. The idea there is that you keep it very basic in its design for those fossils, also that way you have that freedom in the future. We also have the Mewtwo Strikes Back special where Miranda is talking to seagulls to learn the condition of the sea. Wingull doesn't exist yet. And again, it just keeps boiling into this idea of doesn't exist yet, doesn't exist yet, doesn't exist yet. But we have a need. We know that if we dig up the earth, we're gonna find worms. We're gonna find pillbugs. We don't have a pillbug Pokemon. Nevertheless, there are animals that need to exist in these spaces to fill a proper ecosystem. Otherwise, it's gonna feel empty. And you don't want to design something randomly, so just put an animal there for now. The last big reference that I want to pull from the anime is actually the scene where it shows a statue of Kabutops attacking a very large fish. This is all gonna come back later, and I'm not gonna explain the majority of this now because just simply putting all of this into your mind from, again, the Pokedex, the games, the anime, it feels relatively intentional. And from here, many of the remaining references to real-life animals are verbal and can be chalked up to their expectations that a Pokemon based on that animal will be eventually made, and that characters are leisurely aware of their existence. This would include things such as the generalization of Meowth being called a cat, Pikachu being called a mouse. You have multiple mouse Pokemon, multiple cat Pokemon. It would only make sense that their basis would still be derived from it. You have coral for Corsola that you might see, even though there's not all coral being Corsola. There's references to goat's milk well before Go-Goat would be created, or there's no other goat Pokemon, so yeah, just Go-Goat or Skiddo for that matter. These references continue on and on with no real definitive answer. They are all generalizations of animals, whether it be visual or verbal. Now that we have the basis for what we are going to be talking about today, and you understand the references to regular animals that if you didn't know about them, you are now aware of them. You can also look at the Bulbapedia page that will list way more than what I've talked about today. So if you're very curious about all the specific little details and areas where animals have shown up in Pokemon, go check out there. Pokemon Wars. You can't escape the reality of humanity, as 2 separate major wars have been mentioned in the history of Pokemon. Possibly even 4 in total if they're all different and unrelated events. I won't go horribly in depth with these, as I think this topic warrants an entirely different video to explain it all and all the theories and explanations behind them. But we will briefly go over them and their explanations here. The earliest of the wars that were mentioned in the Pokemon franchise would actually be by Lieutenant Surge. Lieutenant Surge specifically states that his electric-type Pokemon kept him alive in the war. Now, when we look at his attire, and if we look at the timeline as to when Pokemon Red and Blue were originally released, he could have been in the Gulf War, or been a part of the invasion of Granada. Either way, there's some wiggle room to have there, and it's not something, like I said, that I want to talk in depth here. There's also apparently a lack of older individuals in Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness. Now, we could attribute that to the idea that there was a war, people were enlisted, and a lot of lives were unfortunately lost in that capacity. That would also be aligned with the idea of the baby boom that happened in real life, but that one might also just be a stretch, considering it is a children's game still, and there may have just not been that focus on creating adults in that world, as it is also a spin-off and not mainline game. Then there's the really incredibly old war that AZ and Eternal Floette were in, which nearly resulted in the destruction of the entire planet. So that's a whole different war that at least we know is separate, but we know almost nothing about. So maybe we'll get full answers to that in Pokemon Legends ZA, which, God, I want to stream that so bad. I'm so excited when it comes out. Actually, since we've made it this far, please subscribe. And if you haven't already, come check out the streams. I am gonna try and do a Pokemon X blind Nuzlocke because I've never played Pokemon X. So if you want to talk to me live and chat with everyone else that likes to join in on the streams, check me out on Wednesdays because that's when I'm streaming that. And go check out my Friday streams also. I'm usually streaming something non-Pokemon just to spread things out a little bit and have a little bit more fun with games that deserve some extra love. And I'm probably still playing through the Ori and the Blind Forest games. If I'm not doing either of those because you're watching this video 4 months from now, hi! Still go say hi and join the Discord. Or maybe become a member because these videos take a lot of time to create. Either way, let's move on. The final big or great war, as I want to call it, that could have happened is between the Swords of Justice in Generation 5 and people. Now, the reason that this occurred is because the Swords of Justice saw what humans did during their civil war, which, again, that might add another war to it all, but since it's not a great war, I'm not really counting it as part of the total number of wars that I'm talking about here. How many times can I say war before it stops sounding like a word? Nevertheless, the goal of the Swords of Justice were to protect Pokemon as humans were starting to remove them from their homes as humans continued to expand. Their job at this point was simply to protect the Pokemon and ensure that proper peace could be had. Or alternatively, I suppose that if they really wanted to and humans didn't cooperate with them, the Pokemon Swords of Justice probably would have just eliminated us. Not gonna lie, it feels like that's exactly what they were willing to do, which I don't blame them based on the information that we would have from that era. Now you might be thinking to yourself, why are we talking about war? Why are we only talking about Pokemon? We're supposed to be talking about actual animals. And the answer derives itself from the fact that we need to look at what war is like in real life. Especially because, again, we can't even escape it in this fictional world. War is common, battle is common. It's unfortunate, and when it's in this game, we can't ignore it. So let's derive some information from what we have, both in real life and in the Pokemon games. When we look at major wars or minor wars, there is the chance that animals are lost over time in a number of different ways. This can be the displacement of animals, which happens due to the destruction of land or their habitats. This is why, over time, it became illegal. Actually, it is a war crime to destroy land unless you absolutely have to in times of war. This is because war is meant to happen between the two factions involved. Innocent lives cannot be hurt. It is, again, a war crime to do so. You can't target hospitals, and you can't destroy the land, whether it's agriculture or forests or anything else. The reason for this, and the reason why it's against the Geneva Convention, I'm talking about the Geneva Convention in a Pokemon video. What in the world? Sorry, I just realized that. It just all clicked in my head. But the reason why it's against the Geneva Convention is because by destroying land, you are harming future innocent lives. You are preventing people after war to live. So, let's say that that wasn't the case right off the go in the Pokemon world, just like it wasn't the case in real life right out the get-go. What would then happen to animals? As Pokemon still exist, Pokemon are still around, which means they could be being used for war, but they could also not be, and they can defend themselves, and people will still stay away from them, whereas your average animal is gonna get trampled. Speaking of usefulness of Pokemon in war, let's take into the idea that maybe Pokemon were used in war as companions or tools. Unfortunately, both are very much possible. As much as I don't want to admit it and don't like it, it is possible. If we take that into account, then you also have to take into account the food supply. Food supply increased dramatically during world wars to ensure that both civilians and soldiers were properly fed. In addition, I will quote from academicearth.org, World War II left the government with a large quantity of unused ammonium nitrate and poison gases, what became America's fertilizer and pesticides. These chemicals were a pivotal part of creating a huge food surplus and a market for cheap, high-calorie foods, especially anything with corn. So, not only do you have an incredible amount of food being produced to make sure that people overseas or in other lands in general are being properly fed and cared for, but now that the war is over, you might have the same situation as we did in real life in the Pokemon world. So now we have an even further extended surplus of food. But until that happens, what do? You're gonna farm animals. So through farming animals, or in dire times of need, if you didn't have rations, what are you going to do? Are you going to eat the Pokemon that can breathe fire and defend you? Because let's be real, there's probably a Growlithe or Arcanine on at least one battalion or military squad or anything like that. I don't know military stuff, I'm not gonna lie to you. I had to do a lot of research and I just kind of know stuff from osmosis outside of the research. So don't make fun of me for saying squad, please. Or are you going to eat the animal that's just kind of there? You're gonna pick the animal. So this could have overall caused a slow decline of animals over time, and it could explain why some Pokemon are eaten in the event that rations get low and it becomes necessary to do so. So if you think of like Slowpoke tails or Crab Brawler arms, or well, less Crab Brawler arms and more Crabominable arms, but nevertheless, these Pokemon that we know taste good. Where did we start? Because after all, a lot of the food that we eat comes from us eating it out of necessity first, which also explains why we know some mushrooms are poisonous or berries are poisonous. You know, you got the Unga Bunga caveman guy who's like, I'm hungry. And other Unga Bunga caveman guys like, I am too. So you grab a random berry because you've eaten berries before and you're like, berry good. You eat it, very good. And then you drop dead. And then other cavemen go, uh-oh. And then he still eats the berry. And then he drops dead. And then another caveman walks over, sees that they're dead, sees that berries are around them, probably eats the berry also and dies. And then by hopefully the 5th or 6th caveman, you realize, oh, I shouldn't be eating this specific berry. Done. And if you don't die from what you eat, then you're just gonna keep eating it. You're gonna hunt what's easier to hunt. Despite my tangent there, I digress. I still think that information is fun and potentially useful at the very least. Which brings me to the idea that I don't believe that all animals would have gone extinct simply because of war. I said earlier that what would you do in the time of war when you have Pokemon and animals? You're going to farm the animals so that way you can continue to feed everybody. They're easier to tame and take care of. So it's unlikely that war would cause animals' population to go down. You might see that in certain types of animals, but not all of them, and especially not all insects. That wouldn't make any sense. So war could be a part of the reason that animals may not exist in the Pokemon world, but I refuse to believe that it is the sole reason for it. Pokerus. The Pokemon virus, which ultimately became Pokerus for short as the coined phrase, is a rare special status condition that can spread from Pokemon to Pokemon. So once again, to give you some background information on Pokerus, if you're unaware of it, especially because it doesn't seem to really exist in the newer games of the franchise, allow me to explain. Pokerus is a virus that exists in the Pokemon games, as stated, that spreads to other Pokemon and eggs. In the games, this is typically done by having an infected Pokemon in your party, and it will spread to adjacent Pokemon that are right next to them, but not diagonal from them. This can spread to eggs as well in the game. You can, of course, set them into your PC, and it will stay infected indefinitely. Otherwise, it can take 1 to 4 days for your Pokemon to be cured. This virus is a mutualistic virus, meaning that it helps the virus by infecting the Pokemon, and the Pokemon gains a benefit as well. What this virus does is it promotes growth. As per game mechanics' sake, the Pokemon gains twice the EVs that are typically gained during and after their infection after it is cured. This is described in the games as tiny life forms, and that your Pokemon are healthy and seem fine. It is also seen in the Pokemon anime, where we see that it has made other Pokemon that are fought in the opposing rival team stronger, more fearsome, and that's fairly scary. Once again, the topic of Pokerus could get its own entire video describing not only game mechanics, but also could it infect people, what has it done, and what can it do, with other potential theories that we can derive from it, such as where did it come from? That wasn't pre-planned. That's not in my script or notes at all. My brain just thought, where the heck did it originate from? What's the origin of the Pokerus virus? Because I didn't see anything, and I now want to do an entire deep dive on the Pokerus virus. This is how it happens. I get a random idea in my head, whether it's because someone else puts it in my head or I think of it randomly when I'm making a video, and then I'm like, well, it's too late for me. I now am going to spend the next 8 hours of my life minimum doing research and a deep dive, and then trying to apply it to real life stuff. Speaking of applying it to real life stuff, there is a potential theory that we have here by using the Pokerus virus as a potential explanation as to what happens to regular animals in the Pokemon world. I want to state before I continue that there's no official case of humans getting infected by the Pokerus virus. There is the iceberg theory that Wally from Pokemon Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald got infected, and that's why he's so sickly, but there's no 100% confirmation on that. Now let's take into account the idea that the Pokerus virus increases growth rapidly. It promotes growth, which likely means, especially if it's done in such a short amount of time and still continues to affect the Pokemon after the infection, that this promotes mutations. So if something promotes mutations and is causing a rapid physical, psychological, whatever type of change in a creature, then what if Pokemon didn't exist? What if animals roamed the world as they do in our world, but then the Pokerus virus came to be, and this virus infecting animals caused a rapid genetic mutation, most of which these animals did not survive. This would explain why we potentially have so many dog Pokemon, cat Pokemon, insect Pokemon, and how we even have Pokemon that are human-like, which is why they have the human-like egg group. If you haven't watched my video on the waifu phenomenon, go watch it. It's safe for work. I did my best, and I don't say anything incredibly lewd. I simply keep it to the facts as best as I can and overreact as I always do, because that's fun to do. But by using the Pokerus as an explanation, it would potentially help us understand how all animals just seemingly don't exist anymore, because good luck getting rid of all insects, especially bees, because we kind of need those. Wow, I'm really getting into that one. I like insects. I'm not really afraid of them, with exception to a few spiders. So when it comes to understanding them and their emotions, it's a little easier. And I say emotions because, okay, we're gonna take a little trip, right? We're gonna take a really quick trip, because one of the big reasons why people are afraid of insects is because they don't have a very visible, understandable expression. You see dogs, they wag their tail. You see cats, they go wah, and then they show their claws. You see another person while you're out by, you know, the break room, and if they kind of give you that look, you know not to go by them. They're kind of just like, you know, I don't really care about you, you know, so on and so forth. So meanwhile, insects, especially spiders and so on, which just don't really have that on the immediacy, people get afraid of whether or not they're going to attack. So I kind of got curious, and then you kind of learn things like if a spider puts both of its front legs up, then it's, you know, it's like, don't come near me. I'm gonna hit you. I don't want to be touched right now. I am a spider and I will bite you. It's just a cute little thing. Meanwhile, there are other spiders that will do that, like the peacock spider, and they'll do a little shimmy dance, the little dance back and forth, and it's really cute. Anywho, share your favorite spiders in the comments below, I guess. I like jumping spiders. I don't know. I don't like actively go after and touch insects or anything like that, but I don't know. Again, I'm not afraid of them. But back to the topic at hand. The idea here is that over time, this virus continued to spread. We know that it's highly infectious. So what it did was it spread between animal to another animal to more and more and more, and they started to mutate rapidly. And when that happens, you're likely not to survive. But the ones that do continued to breed. And maybe they still got infected because it was just a whole pandemic, right? So those that could withstand this virus would then proceed to become stronger, be more aligned with it, and developed traits that we would not otherwise attribute to these types of animals, eventually creating the first Pokemon in each of the regions. This could explain why we have the regional dex and the national dex, because we already know that Pokemon are discovered at different times. It would also explain why some professors are unaware of animals in other regions, Pokemon in other regions, but that's kind of the case in real life as well. You can't expect a professional in one nation to know about every single bird around the entire world. It's possible, but it's not realistic. So if we run off of this assumption, the next question you should be asking is, are there viruses that actually perform mutualistic symbiotic relationships with creatures in our real world? Because that's the question that I wanted to answer next that will help us solve this. And there is. One of the more specific ones that I am going to quote from the Harvard Medicine magazine is, oncolytic viruses, from onco, meaning mass or tumor, and lysis, to break apart, work by killing cancer cells and by helping the immune system do so. Unlike chemotherapy, radiation, and surgery, oncolytic viruses go after cancer cells while largely sparing healthy cells. Now, there are other viruses that do exist within our body that peacefully thrive within us without making us sick. But those are not necessarily mutualistic and require a case-by-case study. So now we are going to take the Pokerus theory that we have now with the war theory that we have talked about earlier and combined them. The reason for this is because if a virus we are sure does not spread to people, which we are going to assume in the Pokemon world based on what we are aware of, then how does it get around the world? Well, war is the answer. It is not the answer. That was a bad phrase. Do not take that out of context. Because war would be happening, and let's assume it was the 3,000-year-old war, or older, however old the AZ war is, we knew it was a war that almost destroyed the planet. Which either A, means that it was just incredibly destructive from one region, or more likely in that day and age, it was a war that was worldwide, giving the perfect potential for the virus to be spread from Pokemon or animal onwards. Despite being able to combine these two theories together, I'm still not quite satisfied. There's no 100% definitive information so far, just a lot of speculation and theories that we can craft and put together. So let's try and look at another bit of information that we can derive from the question of how did humans and Pokemon develop their relationships over time to become more mutualistic with each other? We know definitively that Pokemon have been around for a very long time, not even just looking at the Eternal Floette, but we could also look at other examples like Herdiers possibly being the first dog Pokemon to be tamed, which that could also be an entire video in and of itself, which I could deep dive into the comparison between real life and the first dog that we tamed. I've talked about it in my other explanation and theory videos, and try and use that real information to figure out what truly was the first dog Pokemon that was tamed. To support this, we could also look at Pokemon Legends Arceus, as it is the perfect example of people not being used to Pokemon yet. Now, does this mean that not long before this, normal animals existed? If we're basing it off of everything we've talked about so far, we would have to assume as much, as far back as over 4,000 years ago, minimum, because of the AZ war theory. But here's the kicker. Maybe humans still didn't fully understand or cooperate with Pokemon yet, and we know that, or that they weren't used to them, because of Legends Arceus once again. Because throughout the entirety of Legends Arceus, you have side quest after side quest of getting a Geodude to use for someone to have a pickling jar, or somebody who wanted a Wurmple so that way it could eventually evolve into a Dustox, and it only evolves into a Silcoon, not a Cascoon. About wisps that people believe were ghosts in the trees, when in reality it was just a Chimchar that climbed up the tree. Or strange miscolored Pokemon that are roaming the areas when you find out that there's a shiny Ponyta with blue flames running around. They don't know about shinies, they don't know the habits of Pokemon, and they're only just now becoming less weary of them thanks to your assistance as somebody from the future. And of course, another video idea comes to mind where I could talk about whether or not the Pokedex lies to you. Pokemon Legends Arceus being set in the Edo period, somewhere between 1603 and 1868, due to the clothing that people wear and the architecture, especially with some additional developments, such as Quillfish being a dark poison type, when later on it's a water poison type, which could insinuate the idea of Fugu being allowed and no longer illegal, because dark types are underhanded and some people associate it with illegal activity. So I would dare say that it's probably in the 1800s era, but we don't know for sure. In addition, there are Pokedex entries in Arceus that we know are incorrect if we look at them later on in this series. One of them being that Miss Magius was said to knock on the doors of people and put curses on them, or, you know, be the secret to love, and it kind of really isn't based on the other Pokedex entries that are from the future. Coming back to AZ, we know AZ occurred before the Edo period. Unless Pokemon is in like the year 4000 to 5000, which I don't know, it doesn't seem like it, but no, I'm not gonna entertain that idea right now. I need to stop with the additional ideas. I literally just yelled at myself for it. With all of this information that we have built up and all of these theories, we can combine it all together into one big potential answer. And my reason for this is that in life, there is typically no singular answer to any question or problem that may be presented before you. Typically, it is the collection of answers or solutions that give you a long-term or permanent solution to what is standing before you. And with that, I will support this by also reading the direct quotes that, again, I believe support what I believe to be the definitive answer. Both of these quotes involve Takeshi Shudo, who was the chief writer for the original series of the Pokemon anime, solo writer for the first 3 movies, and Mewtwo Returns TV special. Alongside 2 novelizations of the anime, he also commissioned the creation of Lugia. His final work was writing a screenplay from the 244th episode of the anime, Enlighten Up. May this man rest in peace for his phenomenal contributions toward the Pokemon games through his writing. First quote. Takeshi Shudo's original idea for the 3rd Pokemon movie was about a real-world Tyrannosaurus Rex fossil being discovered. It would have come to life and gone on a rampage through the Kanto region. Quote 2. Also, according to Shudo, real animals went extinct in the Pokemon world years ago and no longer exist. He claimed that instances of real-world animals appearing in earlier episodes of the anime were due to the animation staff not paying enough attention. So what does this mean? Real animals were never meant to be seen in the anime, but they existed at one point. They went extinct and they no longer exist. Those were the exact words. We don't know why they went extinct though. But with the development of the games that touch on the past of the Pokemon world, such as Legends Arceus and the soon-to-be Legends ZA, which I need it so bad. Oh my gosh, woo! We just might find out one day. So with that, we have come as close to the true answer as possible. We may not know exactly how the animals went extinct in the Pokemon world, but they existed at one point in time. But before you go, thank you for watching, thank you for subscribing, and if you would like to support the channel any further, you can always become a member of the channel or give super thanks as well. What that provides to you is you get emotes and you get videos up to a week early. It also helps support the channel so that way eventually I don't have to work a full-time job while also doing all of this. That would be great. But what's more important to me right now is that on August 10th, I will be doing a charity stream for the Children's Miracle Network. I will be playing Elden Ring, and your donations give you coins that you can use in crowd control to affect my game, summon bosses, take away weapons, or help me. You know, you don't have to be mean. In addition, every $100 total that is raised, there are additional milestones of things that will happen. If you can't donate, spread the word. I will have the link in the description of this video. In addition, you can always check out my community tab for additional information, or the Discord. There is a QR code on the image that you can share around. It would mean the world to me if you did do that, as the Children's Miracle Network is one of the reasons that I'm actually alive to this day, in addition to my younger sisters. If you have any questions that you want answered by me going into a deep dive like nobody has before, please state them in the comments below. If you have differing opinions or anything that you would like to add to this that I may have missed, please also put those in the comments below. I love interacting with the comments and at least try my best to read them all so that way I can further educate myself on things that I might have missed about the Pokemon world or the real world as I connect them together. And with that, as always, thank you so much for watching. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. Don't do anything I would do. Please be nice to each other. I love you and I'll see you next time. Bye.